Hello, and welcome to the Poetry Pcast. I'm Patricia, recording this in my turret at P Towers, and it's raining again, and I'm dreaming of being back in warmer climes, which is heightened by the contents of today's podcast, because today I'm taking us outside the comfort zone of English language haiku for a little bit of Spanish haiku. Well, if we're being a little bit picky, it's actually Mexican poetry, but of course, that's written in Spanish. How did I get here? Well, I was researching one-line poetry for some podcasts coming your way in the not-too-distant future. And in the process of research, I came across the poetry of José Juan Tablada. You know, sometimes fate throws a little something unexpected in your direction, doesn't it? And yes, a rabbit hole was excavated. I just couldn't resist it. And I thought you might be interested too. José Juan Tablada. Never heard of him? No shame there. We can't know everything, can we? As I alluded to, he's a Mexican poet. One who is credited by many as being the poet who introduced a haikuesque form of poetry into Spanish literature. José was born in the 1870s, but had a bit of a nomadic soul, like me, I guess. Anyway, he traveled from Mexico to Japan in 1900, which, as you know, was an interesting time in that country. It was beginning to open up to the world, not just in trading terms, but also opening to other cultures and literatures. You also know, because we've talked about this before, that it was around this time that haiku legend Shiki, who was very interested in Western literature, was thinking about the future of haiku in Japan and sharing his thoughts with others. I wonder, and I can't find anything to verify this, but might he have been involved in haiku discussions with Shiki? How exciting. And furthermore, you also know, if you've been listening to my podcasts over the last 9 series, that the rest of the world was beginning to open up to Japanese culture, particularly after the Exposition Universelle of 1867 in Paris. So little had been known about Japan prior to that you can imagine the fascination of the West with this previously secretive and perhaps exotic nation. We in the West, well, some of our ancestors, not mine, because they were a little busy trying to eke out an existence on a small farm in Ireland. Oh, I digress. Back to our ancestors, well, possibly your ancestors. Some of them were about to learn of the existence of haiku in more detail. There was a little knowledge from that period in which the Dutch were involved with Japan, around about the 1500s. Do you remember this poem that I brought to you in an earlier podcast? Lend me your arms, fast as thunderbolts, for a pillow for my journey. Lend me your arms, fast as thunderbolts, for a pillow for my journey. Heinrich Dörfli. And it was written round about the 18th century. But after that, there was pretty much a silent void till the late 1800s. So Tablada, after his time in Japan, headed off to France, which is also interesting from a haiku point of view. You see, the French are often seen as the pioneers, the trailblazers of haiku in the Western world. One poet in particular, Paul-Louis Couchot, is often singled out. Why? Because he and his friends, Albert Ponchin and André Feure, published a collection of haiku, Au fin de l'eau, which means roughly at the water's edge. I'll put a link in the show notes if you'd like to have a read in the original French. Now, this book was published in 1905 after a trip, probably a working trip, they all took together on a barge along French canals. A trip I wouldn't mind doing myself without the working element. Anyway, here is a haiku from that book, probably written by Couchot, but the source I read wasn't too specific about the collaboration, whether the chaps collaborated on every poem or just the renku. I've done the translation. Apologies to Monsieur Couchot if it doesn't have the finesse he intended. It probably doesn't. And maybe this time is a good time to apologize for what is to come, the mangling of several Western languages. Please forgive me. So let's start with mangling some French. Le vieux canal, sous l'ombre monotone, ses verres de gris. The old canal, under monotone skies, verdigris. The old canal, under monotone skies, verdigris. But you see, I think it's unfair that the French get all the credit. As you know, at least if you've read my essay, Plagued by Dogma, A Voyage of Discovery, German Haiku, 1896 to 2023, a case study in English. Bit of a mouthful, sorry about that. Anyway, there is an example of German haiku written and published a little earlier than 1905. This time by Paul Ernst, and he wrote the book Polymeter in 1898. Eine Wasserrose, die aus der Tiefe auftaucht, kräuselt sich das Wasser. A water lily emerges from the depths. The water ripples. A water lily emerges from the depths. The water ripples. And that was by Paul Ernst, and I translated from the German. And what was going on elsewhere? Well, there's some debate that a gentleman called W.G. Ashton wrote the first haiku in the English language in his Grammar of the Japanese Written Language, the second revised edition of 1877, I believe. I'm not sure. In fact, it's really unclear. These haiku are more likely to have been translations. You see, of the three hokku, or as we now call them haiku, translated into English in his book, one can be attributed to Kikaku, which has led folks to believe that all three are not originals. The other two, as far as I know, have not been found in the canon of pre-1877 hokku/haiku. And unfortunately, Ashton left no clues in the book, hence the uncertainty. But I'll read you one of them. It is only man who becomes aged, O thou grass of spring. It is only man who becomes aged, O thou grass of spring. And then there was Yoni Noguchi, a Japanese poet who went on to live in both the UK and the USA. Now, he did write haiku in the English language, and I have a couple of examples for you which were published in his book of Japanese hokku in 1920. Leaves blown, birds flown away, I wander in and out the hall of autumn. Leaves blown, birds flown away, I wander in and out the hall of autumn. Is it a fallen leaf? That's my soul sailing on the silence of life. Is it a fallen leaf? That's my soul sailing on the silence of life. And both of those poems were Yoni Noguchi. Now, as I said, they were written in a book published in 1920, but they could well have been written much earlier. He wrote an essay called Proposal to American Poets in 1904, in which he discussed hokku, as they were then known, haiku as we know them now, saying that it was like a tiny star carrying the whole sky at its back. It's like a slightly open door where you may steal into the realm of poesy. It is simply a guiding lamp. Its value depends on how much it suggests. I'll read that last bit again. It's simply a guiding lamp. Its value depends on how much it suggests. You can read more on what he has to say in the essay. I'll put a link in the notes accompanying the podcast. But here's a question. Do we count these as early English language haiku? And, you know, it could be a bit of a stretch given that it is a Japanese native writing in English. I'll leave that to you to decide. But if you decide that it's cheating, then it's probably not till the decade of the 1910s that we'll find some haikuesque poetry being written in the English language. There is a poem that most people see as the beginning of English language haiku, Ezra Pound's Metro poem. I might debate that. I'll possibly do that in another podcast when we cover the imagists. But anyway, let's stick with Pound for the time being. He wrote his Metro poem in 1913. And if I'm honest, much as I like it, I'm not sure we'd recognize it as haiku these days. But this is important. We're not talking about these days. We're talking about the early 20th century and what was understood then. I'll read it to you in case some of you don't know it. It has a title, which is In a Station of the Metro. And if you look at it on the page, that's if you're watching on YouTube, or if you've got a copy of the show notes, the title, if you see it on the page, like I said, makes it look like a 3-line poem. So let's go for it. In a station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. In a station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. And that's Ezra Pound. So as I said, we'll come back to English language haiku hoku when we look at imagist poets. But unless someone can prove me wrong, I think the Spanish, German, French, and of course Dutch were ahead of English speakers on the haiku writing front. If you disagree, happy to hear from you. Give me the facts. Okay, I'm going to reverse ferret and get back to Tablada, the poet I actually wanted to feature today. It can be debated that Tablada didn't write haiku. If we look at it again from our 21st century point of view, we'd probably not recognize them necessarily as haiku for many reasons, which I won't go into here because, you know, you're a knowledgeable crowd. You know your haiku. But in fairness to him, you could also potentially say that of other haiku written in the early years of the 20th century, written in any Western language you choose. In fact, as you know, I have said it. So let's start with a look at what influenced Tablada. As I've already said, he went to Japan and learnt of haiku. Then he went off to France at a time when poets were discussing the idea of imagist poetry and the haiku. And it has been established that he was part of a Parisian haiku group, which included our friend Paul Louis. And he would have been aware, perhaps even took part in, the discussions around short haikuesque poetry. In honesty, I don't know too much about poetry being written in Spanish at the time, or at any time, to be honest. But I've read that Tablada would be used to writing poetry in a different rhythm to that of the haiku, much as other Western language counterparts. We still have that issue today, don't we? And of course, early Western poets were much more hung up on the idea of syllables. We're not really today, are we? So he had that difficulty too. He recognized these problems, and rather than claiming to be writing traditional haiku, he called his poems poema sintetico, synthetic poems, or Dissociación lírica, lyrical disassociations. So now, at last, I come to some of Tablada's poems. I know, took me long enough, didn't it? So many rabbit holes to go down, with so many left unexplored, for now. So I'm only going to read the Spanish version once. I promise you, you really, really don't want to hear me mangle the beautiful language, but I'll read the English versions twice for you. So let's go. Trozos de barro, por la senda en penumbra, saltan los sapos. And Tablada wrote this in his work, Un Día, in 1919. In fact, all the poems you're going to hear from Tablada come from that book. Which translates to clumps of mud across the darkened path, frogs leaping. Clumps of mud across the darkened path, frogs leaping. And that was translated by Santiago Dedi Tolson. And I want to focus for a moment on translation. If you're watching this presentation on YouTube, you'll see that Tolson has added a colon to the poem at the end of line 2. Across the darkened path, colon. And that's absent in the original. Had I translated it, I don't think I'd have done that. As we've already established, Tablada did not stick to haiku traditions of the time, which would have included a cut. Dedi Tolson's colon. Tablada did not add a colon. He was writing synthetic poems. Aware of haiku, but not writing traditional haiku. Perhaps Dedi Tolson has translated it in a more traditional way, but in so doing he has, at least for me, maybe not for you, he has changed the poem substantially. How can I put it? Maybe by saying that the poem has been closed down. He's not allowed our imagination to run free. Go back to that quotation I gave you from Yoni Noguchi. What was it now? It's simply a guiding lamp. Its value depends on how much it suggests. So, in the original version, line 2, for me anyway, is a pivot line without punctuation. So, as the reader, we're left to consider, is it the clumps of mud crossing the darkened path, or is it the toads leaping across the darkened path? The perils of translation, eh? What I didn't mention so far is that Tablada gave his poems titles. The poem we're discussing was entitled The Toads. Now, how does that affect your thoughts on Dedi Tolson's translation? Clumps of mud across the darkened path, frogs leaping. Okay, the next poem is The Willow, or El Saúz. Tierno saúz, casi oro, casi ámbar, casi luz. Now, for better or worse, I couldn't find a translation that appealed to me, so I did my own. The willow, tender willow, almost gold, almost amber, almost light. Tender willow, almost gold, almost amber, almost light. That repetition is quite effective, isn't it? The next one, the wasps. Las avispas. Las avispas. Como en el blanco las flechas. Se clavan en el avispero. Las avispas que regresan. the wasps. As darts against the target, the returning wasps hit their nesting hive. As darts against the target, the returning wasps hit their nesting hive. Again, I've used a translation by Santiago Dady Tolson. But wasn't quite happy with it, so did a version of my own. The wasps. Arrows hitting a target pierce the hornet's nest. Wasps return. Arrows hitting a target pierce the hornet's nest. Wasps return. I'm still not 100% happy with it. How would you go for it? How would you translate the wasps? Mariposa nocturna. Te vuelve a la desnuda rama. Nocturna mariposa. Las hojas secas de tus alas. I have a couple of translations for you. Both translate the title as night butterfly. But I wondered, is that too literal? Are there night butterflies? Should really have Googled it, shouldn't I, before I started? I was wondering if a better translation might be the moth. Anyway, let's stick with the night butterfly. Nightly butterfly, please return to the naked twig, the dried leaves of your wings. Nightly butterfly, please return to the naked twig, the dried leaves of your wings. And that one is translated by Santiago Dady Tolson. And I have another one, I don't know who translated it, sorry, which reads, return to the bare branch, nocturnal butterfly, the dry leaves of your wings. Return to the bare branch, nocturnal butterfly, the dry leaves of your wings. Okay, next one, La Palma. En la siesta cálida, ya ni sus abanicos mueve la palma. The palm. In the warm afternoon, not even her fans move her palm. In the warm afternoon, not even her fans move her palm. And I'm sorry, I don't know who translated that version. But I do know who translated this version. It was Santiago Dady Tolson again. The palm. In the torrid siesta, not even the palm is fanning. In the torrid siesta, not even the palm is fanning. Okay, not happy again, so I had a go myself. I'm really only a beginner with the Spanish language, as you can probably tell from my horrendous pronunciation. But I think a translation somewhere between those two that I've given you might be better. So I'm thinking something like, in the warm afternoon, not even the fans of the palm are moving. In the warm afternoon, not even fans of the palm are moving. Okay, so I've mangled the Spanish language enough for today. I'll add some links to the show notes so you can have a read, maybe try and translate some of the poems yourself, because there are a few more you could enjoy. And hopefully you'll have a taste for more Tablada. My goal for today was to bring you some haiku that maybe you wouldn't have heard before, to illustrate that there is more to the haiku world than the Japanese and the English versions of haiku. And also that English speakers were probably not the first to the non-Japanese language party. We so often think we were, don't we? What I might also have shown you is that the translating work is not easy. First, there's the literal translation of the words, the grammar to consider, and then there's the sense that the poet wanted to bring to the poem. Quite difficult to understand that often. And to make things worse, I and my fellow translators are translating poetry written some years, even more than a century ago. And so many notions of haiku have changed in the meantime. So you walk a fine line between what you expect to read or hear in a haiku in this day and age and what the poet knew at the time. What's the answer? Do you try and translate according to the traditions of the time? Or do you try and make the poems more accessible by translating them with a view to what a modern audience would expect? So much to think about. What are your thoughts? Now, I have a challenge for you. Can you find a haiku written in a language other than Japanese, written by a non-Japanese native speaker, which predates my example from Germany, written in 1898, and which was written after the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854? Quite specific. Those are the rules. Let's see what our combined power of research can do. Now, I'm off to do some more recording for next week. More original poetry from our video prompt, Monster Stuff, curated by the lovely Alison Whipple. While I'm doing that, perhaps you can go along to this month's prompt on YouTube. Remember, if you're inspired to write, and Arvinder Kaur, who recorded the video and is curating this month, hopes you will be, leave your poems in the comments under the video, because if it isn't there, it doesn't exist and can't be considered for the podcast or the journal. And while you're over there, take a look at our 3-word challenge. Want to have a go at that? Then please leave your 3-word challenge poem under the video on YouTube too. Same rule applies. If it's not there, it doesn't exist. Could be that I'll read your poem out for another YouTube short. And before I slope off to put the kettle on for a throat-restoring brew, you can hear it's cracking up. Did you listen to last week and hear the Golden P Award winners? What did you think? Well, there's a lovely anthology that you can treat yourself to, which contains all their work. It's a fantastic read, and I hope a source of inspiration to other haiku. Well, not just haiku, all short-form writers. So, till next week, keep writing, and remember, there are sources on the website. I'd love to hear if you have any research success on that question I asked you. You know my email. Ciao!